This isn't just a story. It's the spark that lit a war no one prepared for. Not Hollywood, not the press, not even the families who thought their grief had a name. But grief turns to fire when truth is buried alive. They thought they could silence it. Bury it in ocean waves and silence the world with polite statements. But the truth didn't drown. The truth swam to shore. Malcolm-Jamal Warner didn't die by accident. He was erased. And the man who pulled the strings, the one they protected, the one they crowned as America's father, it was Bill Cosby. That's right. The same man who hugged Malcolm on TV screens across the world. The same man whose name is now attached to a truth so vile, so dark, it shakes the foundation of Black Hollywood itself. This isn't just about one headline. It's not about the trending topics. This is about a mother who refused to play dead while they buried her son. Pamela Warner is no longer in the shadows. She stepped forward with trembling hands and unshakable proof. Emails, contracts, audio files, a digital confession of Hollywood's ugliest secret. And at the center of it all, Cosby. Not just a bystander, not just a secret keeper, but the architect of a cover-up so massive, it makes fiction look tame. Cosby has finally been arrested. But Pamela knows better than to celebrate too soon. This isn't about one arrest. This is about the decades of voices silenced, reputations destroyed, and lives erased. This is about every mother who was told to grieve quietly. Every victim who was paid to forget. The silence ends here. The movement begins now. Share this. Speak it. This fight isn't for sympathy, it's for justice. It all began with a tragedy we thought we understood. A drowning. A beautiful soul lost in the water off the coast of Costa Rica. News outlets broke the story like it was just another heartbreak. Actor Malcolm-Jamal Warner, 54, found dead from apparent drowning. And just like that, the world moved on. There were no signs of foul play, they said. No need to question anything, they said. But what if the story they gave us was just a costume? What if the truth was gagged and duct-taped behind closed doors? Because Malcolm didn't just drown. He was pushed into silence, literally. And the one who made it happen? Bill Cosby. The very man who played America's favorite dad. The man who helped Malcolm rise, who smiled through sitcoms and family values. But behind the curtain, behind the studio lights, was something far more sinister. A puppeteer with decades of secrets. A man who knew that Malcolm had seen too much. A man who would do anything to stop those secrets from surfacing. Cosby had already mastered the art of silence. He'd done it before. He knew exactly how to manipulate headlines and erase questions. But what he didn't count on was Malcolm's mother. Because while the world buried her son, Pamela Warner dug him back up. She saw through the clean report. She felt it in her gut. This wasn't just grief. It was betrayal. And when no one believed her, she didn't scream. She started looking, quietly, relentlessly, one folder at a time, until one day, a forgotten envelope slipped from the back of Malcolm's filing cabinet. Inside it was a USB. No label, just digital weight. And what she found inside changed everything. There it was. A folder titled Warner Archive. Her hands shook as she opened. It emails, audio logs, flight itineraries, contracts, NDAs, and deep inside a subfolder called Shadow Network. Pamela had never heard that term before, but her instincts screamed. She clicked. And suddenly the names started appearing. Names she recognized. Names with power. And one name repeated more than any other. Bill Cosby. His name wasn't mentioned, once or twice. It was circled in red, over and over. It was a warning, or maybe a confession. The deeper Pamela looked, the darker it got. This wasn't just one man's mistake. This was an entire system built to protect him. Law firms, PR agencies, media contacts, all part of a quiet machine designed to kill the truth before it even had a chance to speak. But what broke her wasn't the documents. It was the video file. One file buried at the very bottom, labeled June 16th, final.mp4. Pamela stared at the screen. Her hand hovered over the mouse. Her heart told her not to press play. But she did. And suddenly, there he was, Malcolm, not the man from red carpets, not the actor from our childhoods. This Malcolm was tired. This Malcolm was scared. This Malcolm looked straight into the camera and said, "If you're watching this, it means I didn't make it out, or they made sure I couldn't speak." His voice cracked, his eyes hollow. He called it the silence machine, a system of control so polished, so invisible, it erased people without ever firing a gun. Cosby wasn't acting alone. He was the face of it, the kingpin of a quiet empire. Malcolm had uncovered everything. Emails between executives, hush money trails, reputations destroyed with one phone call. It wasn't rage that killed people in Hollywood. It was silence. And now Malcolm had become too loud, too aware, too dangerous. He had to be erased. But Malcolm didn't record that message to be pitied. He recorded it to be heard. He stared into the lens with everything he had left and said it plain. They don't just silence you. They erase you. They smother your legacy. They make sure that when you're gone, nobody asks why. But Pamela was going to ask why. She was going to ask how. And then she was going to make the world listen. Malcolm knew his death wouldn't be the end of his story. He made sure of that. But what followed was something no one saw coming. Not the press, not the industry, and not the powerful men who thought they'd close the chapter for good. The case was quietly shut. The reports signed off. The media moved on without questions, just as expected. Drowning, they said. Tragic, they whispered. And the world, like it always does, accepted it. But Pamela Warner didn't. She couldn't. Not when her son's voice still echoed in her ears. Not when her soul screamed that something wasn't right. She wasn't just grieving, she was on a mission. And in a world trained to dismiss women like her, to ignore the intuition of mothers, Pamela was met with silence. No one believed her. No one listened. Until the silence cracked. It was June 2025, a random morning, ordinary on the surface, until an anonymous email landed at the U.S. Department of Justice. No subject line, no sender, just one single red attachment pulsing with digital weight. Pamela didn't send it, but somehow someone did. And that one file, just one, held the vault Malcolm left behind. The truth wasn't buried anymore. It was live. The documents, the emails, the footage, the names, all of it, leaked. And at the center of the storm, in bold letters and red ink, Bill Cosby. The reaction was instant, like gasoline had been poured over decades of lies, and someone finally lit the match. Cosby's carefully preserved image crumbled overnight. The media that once praised him now scrambled to clean their hands. Newsrooms went into chaos. Producers who once aired reruns of his legacy were now silencing internal group chats, pulling episodes, scrubbing tags. But it was too late. The files were out. And they didn't just hint, they named. Call logs between Cosby's team and crisis managers the night Malcolm sent an inquiry. Memos titled Urgent, Suppress. Lists of networks paid to stay quiet. The ETA silence machine wasn't a metaphor anymore. It was real. And it had schematics. Social media exploded. Hashtags like Our Justice for Malcolm and Break the Silence took over timelines. Activists who had fought other battles now turned their focus to Malcolm. Celebrities who once stood beside Cosby now stayed quiet, or issued hollow PR statements dripping with guilt. But the public wasn't stupid. They knew what they were looking at. This wasn't a scandal. It was a system. And Cosby was its architect. Pamela watched it unfold not with satisfaction, but with rage. Because she had begged people to listen for months. She had begged them to look beyond the drowning report. Now, finally, they had no choice. Each day, more documents came to light. And with each revelation, it became clear. Malcolm's death was just one chapter in a much darker book. Cosby wasn't merely a man hiding behind his legacy. He was a conductor of suppression, with decades of practice and power on his side. The leaked documents were chilling. One file stood out among the sight. Rest, a detailed playbook titled The Silence Machine V2, a blueprint of destruction. Step-by-step guides on how to kill a story before it breathed. It outlined the order of operations. Identify the threat, isolate them, discredit, smear, pay off, bury. And if that didn't work, erase. Malcolm had been labeled in that file. Threat, level, critical. He had uncovered the cracks. He saw the machinery, he traced the money, and they made sure he wouldn't live long enough to explain it. Pamela watched as the pieces fell into place. Every unanswered call, every ignored red flag. The look in Malcolm's eyes in that final video. It all made sense now. The silence wasn't just apathy, it was design. And now the world was waking up. The media that once enabled Cosby could no longer look away. Journalists began issuing retractions. Old interviews were being dissected. Legal experts appeared on television nightly, debating how deep Cosby's influence really ran. But it was Pamela's voice that pierced through the noise. Because this wasn't just news to her. This was her son's murder, finally laid bare. She watched the final videos again. Not because she wanted to, but because she had to. Each one showed a version of Malcolm the public had never seen. The warrior, the whistleblower, the man who knew his days were numbered. In one clip, he looked directly into the camera. "If you're seeing this," he whispered, "then I didn't make it out. Or they made sure I couldn't speak." His voice cracked, but his stare didn't waver. He spoke of Cosby's network, of meetings behind closed doors, of hush money paid in bulk. He said the machine had killed others before him and would continue unless it was exposed. "They don't just silence you," Malcolm said. "They erase you. They bleach your name. They turn your memory into a whisper." Pamela replayed those words 100 times. And every time it lit another fire inside her. But something had shifted now. The public was finally connecting the dots. The silence machine didn't just kill stories, it killed people. And the movement was building. Petitions were launched. Lawyers began lining up. Documentaries were greenlit. But this wasn't about fame. It was about reckoning. Survivors who had stayed silent for decades began to speak out, their voices trembling but fierce. Pamela wasn't alone anymore. She had become the face of something much bigger. The mother who refused to forget. In Hollywood, the ripple effect was undeniable. Executives who once dined with Cosby were being named. Press agents were subpoenaed. NDAs were being questioned. The system that protected Cosby for so long was now being dissected like a crime scene. And right in the middle of it, Pamela stood tall, not with anger, not with vengeance, but with purpose. Because for her, this wasn't about taking someone down, it was about lifting someone up. Malcolm.Cosby's arrest wasn't a victory. It was a crack in the dam, one that had been holding back decades of injustice. The truth was spilling out, and there was no plugging the leak. But Pamela knew better than to believe the fight was over. Cosby's legacy may have shattered, but his machine, it still breathed. She made it her mission to hunt every part of it down. And as the investigation into Malcolm's death continued, so did Pamela's determination. She didn't want headlines. She wanted accountability. She didn't want revenge. She wanted answers. She wasn't out for blood. She was out for truth. In her first sit-down interview after the leaks, her words were soft, but they cut like glass. "I'm not stopping. Not until every piece of this machine is exposed. My son didn't drown. He was drowned. And the people who made that happen will answer for it." That was the moment the public knew this wasn't over. Not even close. The truth was no longer in the shadows. It was everywhere, on every screen, in every headline. And it was Pamela Warner's voice, tired, relentless, and fierce, that refused to let the world forget what had been done. Her courage wasn't performative. It wasn't for applause. It was survival. A mother's last stand. She had pulled the curtain back, and now there was no covering it again. The man once hailed as a television legend was now on the brink. Bill Cosby, the face of America's fatherhood, was no longer facing just legal charges. He was standing in the wreckage of his own lies. The weight of public opinion had turned from admiration to rage. The carefully staged image was shattered. And what was left behind was the blueprint of a manipulator: tapes, voice logs, payoffs, memos, and victims. So many victims, and yet, as each layer of evidence surfaced, so did new names. A network, a web. Not just Cosby, but the people who held the ladder steady while he climbed. People who covered, who cleaned, who silenced. Executives, journalists, legal advisors, even crisis PR handlers whose job wasn't to help survivors, but to destroy them before they could speak. The more the world looked, the more it found. Malcolm wasn't a lone casualty. He was the one who refused to close his eyes. The one who saw the system from the inside and dared to pull the fire alarm. And for that, he was made an example. But Pamela had always known this wouldn't be a clean fight. The files, the voices, the silence, it all pointed to something deeper. And now, with Cosby's arrest made public, she could finally see what Malcolm had always feared. This was just the beginning. The conspiracy didn't end with one man. It stretched into the DNA of Hollywood itself. A factory of polished dreams, stitched together by denial and power. Cosby had weaponized his fame, not just to charm, but to erase, to rewrite stories, to destroy truths. But Pamela's resolve was cutting through the noise. Her voice had become a storm. Every interview, every leak, every trembling testimony that followed, it all amplified the same cry. Justice, not just for Malcolm, but for every soul erased along the way. The world wasn't grieving anymore. It was mobilizing. A movement had replaced the mourning, and then the next wave hit. Not documents, not emails. This time, it was footage, unseen tapes, whispered recordings, more survivors, more truth. No stylists, no lighting crews, just raw, grainy reality. Women speaking into cameras, some blurred, some distorted, but all of them brave. Their words weren't rehearsed. They were lived. One clip from a 1992 studio hallway sent the internet into freefall. A young woman, barely holding her voice steady, described an encounter. He said I could be part of his inner circle. I didn't know what that meant. I just knew I couldn't leave. And in the background, there he was, Malcolm, walking, past, innocent, but watching. It was just a moment, one frame, but it was enough. Enough to prove he saw something he wasn't supposed to. Enough to explain why everything changed after that night. The canceled appearances, the skipped interviews, the silence that wasn't silence, but self-protection. Malcolm didn't just fall out of the spotlight. He stepped back to investigate, to understand. And the closer he got to the truth, the closer the machine came to him. That clip, just seconds long, held the seed of everything. The moment his soul cracked open. The moment he chose truth over safety. Pamela watched that hallway clip with shaking hands. She knew this was the moment Malcolm had described. The moment he realized the cost of what he saw. And the moment she knew they'd decided he couldn't live to tell it. But the footage didn't end there. More voices followed. Women describing hotel rooms, studio calls, blacklisted careers, not theories, not speculation, patterns, evidence, history. The machine had never stopped. It had just gone quiet. But now the volume was rising. And Cosby's defense team? They couldn't plug the holes anymore. The DOJ was under fire. The world was watching. And Pamela had become the center of a revolution she never asked for, but would never run from. Cosby's name was no longer attached to laughter. It was attached to corruption, systemic corruption. And as more victims came forward, the narrative was no longer about saving a legacy. It was about exposing the lie. The man who was once the symbol of Black excellence had used that symbol to build a fortress around himself. But Pamela Warner? She turned that fortress into rubble, not with rage, but with the truth. And the truth was unstoppable now. Investigators confirmed what Pamela had known all along. Malcolm had been gathering files, planning interviews, documenting timelines. He had even created a coded archive for everything he found. Not for fame, but for protection. And in his final video, the one they tried to bury, Malcolm had left no doubt. His voice, ragged and broken, whispered, "They were never going to protect me. They were always going to protect him. Please don't let my story end like this. Be the voice I can't be." And Pamela didn't blink. She didn't cry. She stood up. Because her son had died trying to speak. And now the world was listening through her. That video, the final one, became the matchstick. Not just to burn Cosby's reputation, but to light the fire of a global reckoning. Activists shared it. Survivors quoted it. Hashtags flooded the internet. Justice for Malcolm. Sharks erased the silence. The Warner Files. It wasn't a fan base anymore. It was a movement. A people-powered uprising against decades of manipulation and erasure. The media couldn't bury it. Hollywood couldn't spin it. The truth had already gone viral. And Pamela? She didn't flinch. She wasn't chasing headlines. She was hunting justice. And with every repost, every tearful reaction video, every whispered thank you from survivors across the world, Pamela's resolve hardened. She didn't ask to be the face of a movement, but now that she was, she made damn sure it would last. Not just for Malcolm, but for every voice they tried to delete. This isn't just a scandal. This is history correcting itself, and it doesn't end here. Because this was never just about Malcolm-Jamal Warner. This was about all of them. And it's your voice now that keeps the story alive.